All right, hello class, and welcome to this short video. My purpose in this video is to help outline what I see as the central lens through which we will investigate the American past. There are many ways to do this, and historians from different ages have focused on different aspects of the past. The theme that I am drawing upon is the idea of insiders versus outsiders. I think this is especially important when we consider the African American experience in the United States. Now, what do I mean by insider versus outsider? Let me try to illustrate. I'm going to pull up my pen here. Let's just say that the past, the American experience, has largely been dominated by specific groups of people, and they are easily identified by specific characteristics, by their gender, by their race and ethnicity, by their spoken language, by their religion, even by their class or social economic levels. In the past, this has largely been defined as white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, or commonly referred to as the WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. I will add to this an M because they have been the power insiders of the American past have largely been men. And so maybe we can rearrange these letters to be swamp. Yeah, we'll just call it the swamp. In terms of religion, I've already identified this as Protestant. In terms of language, it's primarily English. And let's just say hypothetically that this group, the swamp people, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant men, came into power very early in the American experience. We can go back to the 16th, 17th centuries. And let's just say that this group has established, I'm trying to draw here, a circle, a three-dimensional circle. All right, and this is the insiders. Now this group have access to the power. These are your politicians. These are your American presidents. These are your business leaders. These are your CEOs, titans of industry. Right? This group of people, the people who historians of the past have largely pointed to as being responsible for growing, building America, were considered insiders. And having this power, political power, social power, economic power, they were able to use the system, the institutions, in order to insulate themselves. And that's where this fence comes in. These insiders were able to build a fence surrounding themselves, wherein not only did it keep them inside, but it kept others out. Now, who are these others? Well, these others are a variety of groups of people. At different periods of the American experience, this group of others would change. For much of the American experience, others included African Americans and every other racial or ethnic group, African American, right, Hispanic, Jews, right, all these other groups found themselves outside. And being outside, they were unable to get access to the power, again, political power, social power, cultural power, economic power, and were often forced on the outside looking in. For instance, African Americans could not vote. So the insiders, this white Anglo-Saxon Protestant men, were able to stay in power by limiting access to power to others. So the African Americans could not vote. They had no say. And so one of the fascinating things about studying the past is understanding who is an insider at a different period. So in 1890, who was considered an insider and who was an outsider? In 1940s, who was an insider and who was an outsider? And what we'll see is that the boundaries for this group will evolve. At times they will expand, making room for more groups as they assimilate and find themselves in common with the insider class. The boundaries to this group would expand, or they would be more porous, allowing people to seep in through the sides. At other times, this boundary of the insiders would shrink, and the insiders would find ways of expelling people or finding new criteria to keep others out. So take, for instance, African Americans. Right? For much of their experience in America, African Americans were relegated to the status of slavery. And as such, they had no power. They were, in many cases, not even considered human. When we look at the Dred Scott Supreme Court decision, we'll see that the justice declared that African Americans had no rights that a white man was responsible for adhering to. After the end of the Civil War and during Reconstruction, right, President Lincoln will sign the Emancipation Proclamation. The Congress will pass the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, and in this way expanding the power, giving access to power to more groups, allowing African Americans the right to vote. And in this way, these boundaries would expand. But as we will see this term as we study Reconstruction, during this time, Southern white powers, the Democratic Party, found ways of shrinking these boundaries, drawing up new criteria, things like literacy tests or land ownership rights, through which African Americans were once again kept out from the insider status. So this is a really important way of looking at the past. We can include many groups and see their experiences as this one of struggle between the insider and the outsider category. In terms of religion, we can look at various groups. We can look at the Catholics throughout much of the 18th and 19th century. Were not permitted access to power. It wasn't until John F. Kennedy in the 1960s that a non-Protestant or that a Catholic was elected president. We can look at the experiences of other religious groups, like the Mormons of the 19th century, where in their practice of polygamy, even though that they were white Anglo-Saxons, their practice of polygamy was a category through which the outsiders found ways of keeping them out. In terms of race, again, we can look at African Americans. We can look at the policies of the United States toward Asian and Asian Americans during the first half, the latter half of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. We can look at the experiences of Latino, Hispanic. We can look at the experiences even of the Irish, who, because of stereotypes of their uneducatedness, were often relegated to secondary citizen status. We can look at the experiences of women, who for much of their experience in the United States were not given access to power, were forced to sit on the sidelines, were not allowed to vote, and let's face it, have never been elected into the highest political power seats in our country. So this idea of insider versus outsider will be one that is extremely important as we continue this term to study the experiences of African Americans, to see them struggle, to find ways of at times assimilating to the demands of the insider class, giving up things like their culture, their language, their naming patterns, in order to assimilate to the demands of the insider class, and at other times forcing the insider class to expand their boundaries to find ways of including African Americans. And this will work with any groups. You could look at the experiences of the LGBTQ community as an outsider trying to find ways of expanding the power, expanding the boundaries of that insider status, which really didn't happen until the 21st century, just in the last decade or so. So I hope this is a helpful way of thinking about the past as a struggle for power, for inclusion, for acceptance.